Hello, welcome to the Media Club. I'm your host, Matt Deegan. On today's show, after 10 years of scrutiny, the latest Expert Women report reveals the big shows that are letting the side down. Former broadcast exec Professor Lis Howell is here to tell us who's booking twice as many men as women. Also on the programme, why does Netflix kill its young so often? As Kaos becomes the latest drama to be axed after one series. TV critic Scott Bryan is here to give us the details. All that plus, there are a raft of new studios under construction in the UK. Why do we need more? And rather than no work for freelancers, will it soon be no freelancers for work? That's all happening in this edition of the Media Club. Come on in. So welcome back to the Media Club. Before we get into some big stories this week, Scott, who would you like to nominate to join us in the Media Club this week?
So I'm going to nominate someone called James Rowe, who is one of the co-presenters of the podcast The Eurotrip. It's a fan media podcast. Of course, Eurovision hardly needs any introduction. But you're probably thinking, fan media, isn't that a little bit twee? But actually, what he has managed to do with his co-host Rob Lilly-Jones is really build a reputable news source on all things Eurovision. And of course, earlier this year, it was a Eurovision that was heavily reported on because of Israel's inclusion during the Israel-Hamas war. And I think what they were able to do was cover it impartially, speak to all sides, and actually become a proper news source. James was on BBC News consistently throughout the week as a source. So the reason why I'm mentioning James is that this week he announced he's standing down from the podcast. I think he's now joined Which UK. And I would just say he's one to look out for, like somebody who knows his beat incredibly well and does it really consistently. Well,
he's very welcome to join us here. And Liz, who would you like us to add to our Media Club membership?
I would like you to add Lisa Campbell, currently head of comms at ITN, but known to me primarily when she was editor of Broadcast magazine in the EMAP stable. And about 12 years ago, we got together to start the Expert Women campaign. And Lisa was amazing and pulled off some incredible things, like writing to Harriet Harman, who got in touch with Tim Davie when he was acting Director General. And they set up the Expert Women Days, training hundreds of women, giving them confidence to go on air. So she's a force of nature and quite remarkable, and definitely my pick of the week.
Okay, well, we will add her too. And speaking of Expert Women, so this is a project you've been working on for quite a while. 10 years?
Well, actually, it's about 12 years.
Okay.
And it's in two distinct phases. What we do is we count the number of male experts, or men experts, and the number of women experts on 6 flagship UK news programmes. And it's quite simple methodology. We have 6 postgraduate students, and they will monitor a programme each for 1 working week a month, for as many months as we can afford. We did 6 months this year. We did from November to April 2023 into 24. So they just count them, and they've got guidelines as to what is an expert, because the first thing everybody says is, what is an expert? In many ways, we'd be better using the term authority figure, because what we're looking at is a person who's been invited onto a show to give their opinion because of their expertise.
So it's less about like the Prime Minister happens to be a woman or happens to be a man. It's more for people where they had a choice perhaps of who they could bring on.
No, we count everybody. And there is another methodology, which is the BBC's 50-50, and I think that discounts politicians on exactly the grounds that you've said. But we don't believe that anybody has any right to be any more equal than anyone else. If they're a politician, they're an expert, male or female. And it is interesting because we do find that predominantly more men speak on politics than women, even though you've got a 60-40, with 40% of MPs are now women, we still get more men talking about politics. And that isn't because there's no choice for the editor. There often is a choice, and for some reason they choose the man.
So what have we learned in this latest round? What's changed?
Well, what's happened in 10 years, because we then, after starting it as the Broadcast magazine coverage, which was great fun as well and caused lots of people to be very irritated. We then made it into an academic project because City University reckoned we had enough data to actually have something substantial to go on. And it was after that we decided to just do the 6 programmes every year and measure them. So what we've got now is a situation where in 10 years we have halved the number of men versus the number of women, which is quite an achievement. On the other hand, there are still twice as many men because there were 4 times as many men to start with.
Right.
It's all a bit complicated and numerical, but it's a sort of bittersweet story that there's been a big change, a big reduction in the number of men, but there's still twice as many men as women, particularly on the big beast programmes.
So what are the 6 that you covered?
OK, we covered Channel 4 News, Sky News at breakfast time, ITV News at 10, Today on BBC Radio 4, BBC News at 10 and Channel 5 News. And the outlier there is Channel 5 News. Channel 5 News does really well. There are only one and a half as many men as women on Channel 5 News. I don't know what they do at the half.
Do we know if they've made a real effort to do that, or it just...
I think all the programmes are making a very real effort because they don't like it when we bring out our figures, and they are trying, there's no doubt about it. Channel 5 News is earlier in the day, and it has a predominantly female audience. Although the funny thing is that all news programmes have a predominantly female audience, which is something people don't realise. For example, BBC News at 10 is 52% female in terms of the audience. Channel 5 has a slightly different structure. There are more smaller stories, and it isn't quite so desperate to be on top of the big political story of the day. Of course, it will cover it, but it might have other things as well. Slightly different flavour to Channel 5 News.
And when it comes to individual shows, it seems some of the most influential maybe need to up their game. Who has not done so well on the...
BBC News at 10 and ITV News at 10. I call them the big beasts of the jungle. They never do quite as well. For example, the worst one this time round was ITV News at 10 with a ratio of 2.39 men to every 1 woman. And BBC News at 10 was 2.28 men to every woman. In a way, it's historical because the idea was in the past that the show at 10 o'clock at night catered for men who'd come home from work, businessmen, middle-class men in the south of England, and they used to act as if that was the sort of flagship because it attracted that sort of important audience. In fact, the 6 o'clock news now actually has more viewers than the 10 o'clock news, but it's never got quite the same cachet because there's still a feeling that, the 6 o'clock news is for women making the tea and the 10 o'clock news is for men for a considered review of things, particularly politicians who were available at that time. So there is a sort of historical feeling about these shows.
Is there any difference when there's a female editor or women are in charge of a programme?
Well, yes, there is, technically, because when we started, it was all male editors and there was a terrible ratio. And now it's all female editors, pretty well, and the ratio is much better. But it's tough for both genders because there's a lot of pressure on them to choose the people who are seen as most important. And we still live in a society, sadly, where men are seen as most important. It's also interesting that at one point, we did another little exercise, very subjective, where the monitors, the people doing the measuring, were asked to grade the type of expert. And it was on a grade of 1 to 5. And we found that women experts were like 1 to 3 and male experts were like 3 to 5. So even when you've got an equal number of experts, the men experts are more prestigious often.
Scott, you're partial to a TV couch. Do you notice it's more male driven? Is it your own bias in there, or do you think it's changed over the time that you've been popping up?
I mean, I think there has been a change. Arguably, it just has not been happening quickly enough. And I think that it is certainly the case where some particular beats just have far more men than women, such as in politics, such as I would reckon economics.
Well, interestingly, we did also some qualitative research in about 2016 about which genres were most male dominated. What do you think it was? Which do you think was the genre that was most male dominated? The genres we looked at were health, entertainment, sport, economics and politics.
I would say politics.
Spot on. Most people say sport, which is pretty bad, but politics had a horrendous bias in favour of men.
And but I mean, I have noticed though there is a change. I mean, and also about the 50-50 scheme. I mean, I've been initially booked onto a programme, but then they've rung me up and said, no, actually, we've worked it out. They sometimes do it per show, and they say, actually, we've worked out that we've had too many men on this broadcast. And then they've flipped me over for somebody else, which I'm completely happy about. So there is an actual, I think they now have to account for, with a producer on some shows, every guest, and they keep that, and then that's logged and kept into a tab. So I know that the BBC is actively working towards it, but like you say, it's a step in the right direction.
I mean, the 50-50 scheme is really interesting at the BBC. It's a wonderful endeavour, but because it's 50-50, it doesn't look at the nature of the people that they're measuring. So I always say, well, if you've got the magician and the magician's assistant, that's 50-50, but it's not actually equally weighted. Right. It's quite different. But they are now looking at at all of that too. And ITV is doing exactly the same thing. They don't call it 50-50, but they do monitor.
How much of an issue do you think it is that men are never seem to be worried about putting themselves forward, whether they're actually qualified enough to speak?
I mean, it's a joke, really, that they say that women will say, oh, I don't think I can do an interview about that because it's not exactly the subject of my PhD. And a man will say, yeah, I'll Google it in the taxi. And I think there is an element of that. Men are more confident in our society. And the BBC ran these excellent workshops for women from 2013 to 2018, I think the last one was. And literally hundreds of women were trained in confidence. And that was great. We've still got a long way to go, though.
And you're going to still keep an eye on it?
No, I'm not. I'm an old lady now. And it's very, very onerous. I'm giving this up, and I don't think in this current academic form it will continue. What I'd like to see is this go to the grassroots where it started. It started with Two Angry Women and Broadcast Magazine, and Broadcast Magazine was great, part of the EMAP stable, and put the word out to women who were reading things like Building Weekly and Plumbers Weekly and whatever. And I'd like to see it go back to the grassroots, and some external organisation that's not the broadcaster either counts the figures or monitors the figures that they count, because there's nothing like not marking your own homework. When it's somebody else, it always feels a little bit edgier. You really try a bit harder.
Well, if you're interested in getting involved, drop us a note, hello@themediaclub.com, and we will hook you up with Liz and see what we can do.
Yeah, you could do it.
Yeah, well,
believe me,
Matt is a very busy person is.
We'll help it happen though.
It's a poison chalice in some ways, but well worth it in the end.
And the results are going up on the website soon?
Yeah, the website. It won't be immediately because it's quite complicated getting it all together. And I'm actually going away. Unfortunately, the conference was supposed to be in June and was postponed because of the election. And so it happened in October, and it's all been that little bit more difficult. But everything will be there soon.
Just remind us of the website address.
expertwomenproject.com.
expertwomenproject.com if you want to check that out. Okay, a lot of the media press was dominated this week by Channel 4's annual report highlighting a loss last year of 52 million. Scott, what's been going on?
I mean, I sort of see this as two stories. I know that we're going to talk about Netflix later on, but it's just the transition between the two. Channel 4 saying that they fell into a £52 million loss, which is kind of, I think, the biggest fall since the recession in I think 2007, 2008. If you compare that to Netflix's profits, which were also announced this week, they're up to £47 million in profit. So it's a difference of 100 million. Now, I know completely different business models. One is a legacy business, one operates as part of a larger company. But I think it just sort of shows maybe the difficulties of trying to move yourself into a streaming model whilst also still having to continue doing your old traditional model, which is on linear. Now, Channel 4 have said, look, the future's looking bright here. I think at Edinburgh TV Festival earlier this year, they were a bit more positive than they were last year. They've highlighted that their growth is so far beating target. So they had a set saying it'll be about 30% of overall revenues by the end of this year, that youth audiences are flocking to YouTube in greater numbers and they're just following where their audiences are rather than dropping everything online. But I think when you see these figures, you're going, my word, this is a challenging time for Channel 4.
Well, also, it's only a year ago they were celebrating winning a reprieve from privatisation, sort of a headquarter move that's happened over the last couple of years. Bonuses awarded, waived, and then sort of taken up.
It's a bit complicated, isn't it? I think like Ian Katz wavering his bonus for this year, saying that basically because of his relationship with indies, he felt that he couldn't. The indies obviously have been struggling just because they've been having to deal with far fewer commissions than what they would usually be used to. Alex Mahon still accepting a bonus, whilst that is, she says, is considerably down. She says it's related to KPI figures. I'm not really an economics person. I won't say I'm going to be an expert on that either.
It's probably right that they've absolutely hit certain KPIs, but Liz, doesn't look great, does it?
Well, I've got a slightly cynical take on this. Okay, if you're worried about being sold by the government, you're not going to want to be massively in profit, are you?
Okay.
So it seems to me very wise that they're spending on their digital end and modernising, as it were. And I don't think it's necessarily in their interest
I suppose you could argue it's a better time to lose money is just after you've been saved from privatisation.
Absolutely, yes. And it's not going to happen again for a while if you're looking a bit on the dodgy side, in terms of your bottom line. So I do wonder about this. And that's Channel 4 has always been a bit different from anything else. I mean, it's funded by advertisers, but it's not owned by anybody. It's a publicly owned company. Or company is the right word. So it's always been an outlier. It's a strange animal, and so it can act in a strange way.
Do you think it's able to shift and change into what's necessary in 2024?
I think of all the public service broadcasters, it's possibly the most likely to be able to do so, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Scott, what do you think?
My concern about Channel 4 is about the content. I just don't think they have enough hits. It is evident when you look at the schedule. I think their most successful show is Bake Off, but that is a show that's from the BBC. They've added their Channel 4 style to it, but arguably it's a legacy show. They have said, of course, their Dispatches investigation into Russell Brand created a lot amount of headlines, but that's just one example of a documentary. They do have hits like Married at First Sight, but nothing that I think sort of is anywhere near as big as the hits they had 20 years ago. But it's the main channel.
It's so different now, because the things that are a hit now and the things that were a hit, they did it with Shock, didn't they? And Shock doesn't really seem to work to the same extent now. There's also an immense amount of luck in it, because when I was running UK Living way back in the sort of late 1990s, we got really lucky. We got Jerry Springer and we got Ali McBeal, and we had a brilliant acquisitions person. And you get lucky with a couple of shows and it hammocks the rest. And it gives you the confidence with your little bits of production as well. So it's just unlucky. They're just not, you're right, you're absolutely right. They're just not hitting the right note. But that doesn't mean that they won't in 6 months' time.
But is one of the I think you're completely right, but also they haven't had a hit for quite a long time. I mean, have they just gone through a really duff patch?
Yeah.
Or is this where audiences are, like are there audiences in different places?
I mean, I just think we're in a content war, and when you want to speak to some creators, they highlight the fact that, and we will come on to the downside of this, when you partner with a streamer, you are given more money, more creative freedom, and a chance of an international hit rather than a national and immediate national hit. And I think it's also that Channel 4 do think differently, have taken commissions that might be less financially lucrative, but are also in this period, have limited the amount of commissions that they give, so they are harder to come by. I mean, I think Channel 4 has a very important place within our ecosystem and does things differently compared to the BBC and from streamers. But it is just concerning that if you don't have a tentpole hit every sort of 3 to 6 months, that does not therefore help the other shows that are there to support it. You kind of need to get people in on one show just to get on their homepage and see what others are out there. If they're not going to come to your website, they're not going to watch the other shows either.
But there's a very interesting thing thematically about this, isn't there? Because the other shows, apart from, say, Channel 4 News and some of the very good current affairs that Channel 4 does, they're really like a sort of enhanced daytime sort of homemade British audience, Gogglebox type of show that's going on. And the streamers are doing fabulous, high-end, marvellous dramas at enormous expense. So you really, you can't make the same comparison. It's incredibly difficult. And if Channel 4 hasn't got the finance for a fabulous, costume drama or something like that, it's going to be very, very difficult unless they go back to their crazy beginnings and think, what can we do that's really unusual, and perhaps something that doesn't involve nakedness, sex or dating. Now, that would be really new, wouldn't it? Or baking.
Speaking, you just mentioned Netflix. As you said, Scott, 47 million pounds of profit last year. Is that UK? Is that like UK profits?
Yes.
They're doing better on the hits front, but they love killing off shows. So the latest one that's been killed off is Kaos, which I was going to get round to watching, and now I'm thinking, sure, it's not coming back, should I?
So, I mean, Kaos is good. I gave it a positive review. It's written by Charlie Cavell. Am I allowed to say the word effing?
Sure.
They made The End of the Effing World, which was a fantastic, really beautiful drama about 5 years ago. Then they were given this Netflix series that starred Jeff Goldblum, but has a real big A-list cast. Only 5 weeks after it debuted, Netflix announced that it had been cancelled. And I have been looking at the data. I mean, it was one of the Netflix's most popular shows on the week it launched. From overnights.tv, it got, I think, 1.7 and 1.3 million for the first 2 episodes, and they'd rank highly, but then just sort of sunk away a bit.
It burned brightly for a short time.
I think Netflix want to normally have shows that sustain themselves. I mean, think of Bridgerton and The Gentleman. They were up there, and of course, Baby Reindeer. They stayed up there for a long, consistent time, and I think Kaos just did not match the expectations that Netflix have. So, of course, it's led to this cancellation. A real kind of, if you've been on any social media this week, you've seen a bit of a kickback from this. I mean, I'm sort of in two minds. I mean, I sort of think to myself, Netflix just have a different business model than TV services do. I mean, Channel 4, if it was one of their shows, they might have a different criteria about why give it a second series than Netflix. Netflix purely do it, I think, based on the numbers and whether you stay on there. But on the other hand, you're sort of thinking of the reputational damage that this can cause to Netflix if it just happens too often that if you invest your time into a show only to see the rug pulled under you, then you go to yourself, why am I paying $10.99 for this?
Liz?
I don't know about that. I think that it's the audience appreciation index, as we used to call it. You've got a lot of very dedicated fans, or a large minority, if you like, of very dedicated fans making a big fuss about this, but there just aren't the numbers to justify it. Netflix are ruthless. They can afford to be ruthless. They've got millions of billions of people out there who are going to be interested in what they're putting on their streaming. They don't care about a small and dedicated number of fans. They just say, no, it's not making it, it's not getting the numbers out. We can't necessarily do that in everyday terrestrial or ordinary television, because you do have a commitment to your audience, yada yada, but you still drop things that don't make it.
Do some shows need a couple of seasons to really establish themselves? There's loads of history. People point to like Only Fools and Horses and things like that, and actually it took a couple of seasons for it to work.
That was a different world, you know. I'm afraid they've got to make it work very quickly in the Netflix world.
But I do find that a shame, though. Like this week, I looked into The West Wing, one of the most successful shows of all time. When, as in critical shows, when it started in American network TV, it was about 25th most popular program for the first series. Then it got to sort of season 2, season 3, when it was up to the 10th most popular. And then, of course, has then won loads of awards. But it took more time than I think people realised. With the benefit of hindsight, we think things become hits.
But maybe that could be the USP of traditional television in a way, the fact that you do have longer to get into a series and it's not going to be crash and burn, because we can do that with the ordinary British television offering.
I sometimes think with the streamers, they're after telling people they've got a new show. And if you go into even season 2 of anything, your funnel is getting slightly smaller.
Absolutely.
So a load of people coming in the top and the returning people are less. Whereas if it's like, hey, something new and shiny, come and look at this, it sort of keeps resetting with customers' minds that, it's worth keeping the streamer.
I think you're bang on with that. That's absolutely true. It's the same sort of in the publishing world with books and things. You get a hit book and then you've got to do another book and it never does quite as well as your first book, or very rarely, and so on and so forth, until they drop you and you've got to come back with a new idea. And it's just a question of the economics of the way the streaming works. They've got to have a lot of people, a lot of the time. They don't care about retention. Why should they?
Scott, obviously production companies, they love the money that comes from Netflix. Are they bothered by this as long as they keep writing the checks? Do they keep stum?
I mean, I think at the moment, unfortunately, by the difficulties that have been faced in the TV industry, I think people are happy for a commission generally, just because of the financial struggles. I mean, the thing that stood out to me was Night Sleeper, which was made by Euston Films. I mean, this was a 9 p.m. program on Sunday and Monday. A really big marketing for it, a really big push for it. But Euston Films, the company that made it, is now wound down because they said that they don't find it sustainable. So it was a bit of a swan song. And I think
the problem with Night Sleeper was that we all hoped that the train would crash and destroy Euston Station.
Yes, as a cliffhanger, saying will Euston survive is certainly a questionable one. But I mean, I'm sort of thinking as alarm bells. If you're having a 9 p.m. show, prime time, big budget, and the production company behind it is winding up, like, what does that say about the health of the industry? And I think it just comes down to far fewer commissions still happening. I think there's still an adjustment in the post-COVID world. And, what you're having, and has been reported brilliantly by Broadcast along with other titles, are the fact that you're having the disappearance of the middle. You're having premium high-end dramas, which are attractive to streamers still, because you kind of have to spend money on it to get people to watch it in the first place. And you're having on the lower end, particularly PSB, much cheaper programs on one end, or maybe shows that are trying to fit a certain criteria. But then the shows that used to be the tentpoles of 8 p.m. are no longer really being made, because you're not getting those audiences for linear channels to invest in them. And that's creating a huge lack of programming and the commissions that these production companies really need.
I mean, Liz, you've run channels before. If you think about your audiences back then and those sorts of people now, where they've got the option of watching a Netflix drama in the afternoon, scheduling those channels must be quite difficult.
I don't know what the situation is with daytime, but my gut feeling would be that they're not going to be watching the Netflix show in the afternoon. They're going to be watching something that's local and affects them and talks about their lives. I mean, look at This Morning, a massive show. And I don't think that Netflix is going to be able to compete with that. And we've also got a certain schedule to our lives. It's traditional that, in the morning, women are doing active things around the house. They might have a bit of a break in the afternoon, but they need something that's on the telly that they can do other things at the same time. You don't have to sit down and absolutely concentrate on which character dressed as a funny elf is doing what. So anyway, so I think knowing your audience helps, and that daytime television is daytime television made like that for a reason. It's when daytime television goes into evening television that you've got a problem. Either you've got to have a brilliant idea, or it's not going to work.
So it's a challenge of shoulder peak.
Absolutely.
You're exactly right. I was speaking to some people in daytime TV quite recently, and daytime TV is holding up quite well. If you look at the viewing figures for BBC Breakfast, Morning Live, I mean, particularly consumer affairs shows in the morning, they are holding up really, really well. Also the BBC News at 1, which has recently moved up to Salford. In fact, all of those programmes, BBC Breakfast, Morning Live, and the 1 o'clock news are all based now up in the northwest.
Because they fit with the lifestyle. And they fit with a regional lifestyle as well. For example, the news at 6 o'clock, we were talking about news figures earlier. News at 6 o'clock works very well in the regions. So I think that that's fine. And that is my point exactly. But when you put it in the evening, you've got to have another USP. Okay,
we're going to take a break. And when we return, we're going to be talking about another TV show with an ITV regional franchise crossover. You are the perfect audience to listen to that. Back in a mo.
Hello Media Club listeners, Patrick here from Podcast Discovery, the podcast marketing company. This week we've been thinking about the power of a rebrand. Take a look at your phone right now. Look at Matt in his lovely pink blazer. Think of all the well-informed gossip you'll find behind that big blue door. You've already forgotten about the Media Podcast, haven't you? You're now a member of the Media Club. If you're interested in rebranding your podcast, get in touch with us by heading to podcastdiscovery.com. That's podcastdiscovery.com.
Now, having great content is important, but research shows that listeners perceive you as more intelligent, credible, and even more likable when your show has high-quality audio. That's why we record our show at Podshop Studios in central London. Their purpose-built podcast studios and expert engineers take care of the technical side, so we can focus on delivering our best content for our listeners. So whether you're just starting out and need guidance on how to get your audio right, or you're a podcast veteran like us, Podshop Studios ensures your show sounds professional and helps you come across as the expert you are. And for a limited time, you can get 25% off your first booking at Podshop Studios. Just use the code MEDIACLUB when booking at podshoponline.co.uk. That's 25% off if you use the code MEDIACLUB at podshoponline.co.uk. Don't miss out. Head to their studio page now. Welcome back to the Media Club. This week, we've been talking about a whole selection of things. The BBC have apologised for a bit of a glitch to their weather app after it forecast winds of over 15,000 miles an hour in the UK on Thursday. Finally, the Daily Express has a decent weather story to write about. Do you have fond memories of the golden age of women's magazines? Two journalists are poised to leaf through vintage magazines and reflect on their legacy in a new podcast called Mag Hags. It launched this week with an issue of Cosmo from October 1982. And Radio TechCon is back in November. The industry's technical and engineering conference is a Plus for all audio geeks. And this week they launched their bursary for those who might find money might be a barrier to attend, or they might be in an underrepresented part of the industry. You can apply for that bursary at radiotechcon.com. Might not apply to you, but it might apply to someone in your team. Send them along to radiotechcon.com. Okay, Scott and Liz are still with me. Talking Telly, a new series is launched on Disney Plus, Jilly Cooper's Rivals, which has, Scott, a particular niche media setting.
I mean, it's set within. This is the thing that I was watching this when I was figured to myself. It's essentially about a regional ITV company, back based in the 1980s, taking on a new host for a TV show, and about whether they can make it economically lucrative whilst also fulfilling the criteria to have their broadcasting license renewed. Now, when you're thinking about that at the surface level, you're sort of going, hang on, how can this be a drama? And then you realise it's Jilly Cooper. And my word,
it's like they've made something especially for the three people in this room.
Stop now. That was my life. And believe me, it was a drama. Every day, the franchise, the competition, the board, having to deal with the viewers. It was amazing. But the whole 1980s was a media, I don't know, shark infested pond, really, because I also wrote books about this. I actually wrote 3 books set in regional TV in the 1980s, and I remember my editor at the time saying, I'm really sorry, there's just not enough sex in this book. I said, well, yeah, I'm really trying hard to write these sex scenes. And she said, well, that one you did in the car, it's sort of all right, but you never got them to take their seatbelts off. Oh, shit, forgot about the seatbelts. And then she said something about, well, could we have some girl-on-girl action? So I said, well, what do you mean? She said, couldn't she have sex with her best friend? I said, well, her best friend gets murdered in chapter 2. And she said, necrophilia! So it really was.
Was this an accurate representation of your time in
I think that there
TV?
was a lot more sort of sexy stuff about it. It was a very, in a way, a very liberated time, the 80s. Yeah. People started talking about it and doing it. And lots of people got divorced and so on. And I'm really looking forward to seeing this, because you watch these Australian retro shows and they really work, even though I didn't know anything about Australia.
Like the newsreader.
The newsreader. I loved the newsreader.
It was really good.
Yeah, and if this does for me what the newsreader did for me, God, it made me feel so young.
Have you seen
I have seen it. I really do like it. I am surprised that it's on Disney. Like, I think after the first 5 minutes I was watching a scene and I could hear a rumble and I was like, what's that? And I realised it was Walt Disney spinning in his grave, because it is the least Disney show. I went to the screener for it about a month back, and then the PR was like, oh, let me know what you think. And I went out after the first episode and I was like, this is the least Disney thing I've ever seen in my life. Well done. That's what an achievement. It's certainly fulfilling. I think I've not read Jilly Cooper's books, but the fans in the audience were definitely saying this is vintage Jilly Cooper. The cast is frankly unbelievable. It's complete nonsense, and I really enjoyed it.
So who's in it?
I mean, Danny Dyer is in it. You've got Aidan Turner in it. You've got David Tennant in it.
I'm going to see it this afternoon.
Are you?
Yeah, I'm going to try to.
Oh no, it's not on for another week on Disney yet.
And you've seen it. It's so unfair.
It's on a preview, but it's I mean, an all-star cast, and I think it's an interesting commission. I think the person who commissioned it was also the person who commissioned It's a Sin when it was on Channel 4.
Oh, that was amazing.
And I think Disney Plus are in an interesting position when it comes to their commission, because they try to get audiences who are adults who perhaps bought it originally for their kids' subscription, and they're trying to offer something premium to get them to stick around, maybe to renew it for another year. But they seem to go for the strategy of far fewer commissions but spending a lot on them, which is a bit of a risk, because of course if a show doesn't work then it can really affect them negatively. But with this one, I think the expectations have been high, the production standards are high, and it's completely unlike any Disney show you're going to see.
Will it work in other countries?
That's just what I was thinking.
It's hard to know.
But if it's a drama with people being competitive about something and a bit of sex and personalities,
and they've contemporized it, I think that they look into sexism, they look into racism, they look into misogyny. I think they look into just the ostentatious wealth and the division between people who work on the studio floor versus the executives. So I think they have tried to, like many shows set in the past have done so, try to kind of actually make it reflect what people are talking about now, just maybe in a kind of a different setting. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I don't know whether Disney care so much about whether it attracts Americans or not. They've really specifically talked to us about being a UK commission. But I mean, I don't know what their internal.
I think it's got everything from the sound of it. It's got the nostalgia, it's got the distance, it's got the great stars, it's very colourful, and it's got real human life. And it was a very exciting time to be in media in some ways, and very sort of staid and not very exciting in other ways. And then, of course, along came cable and satellite and blew it all open.
So, in your GMTV times, how
that was a bad time for me, Matt.
Well, how similar was that? Have you watched the morning show?
No, I haven't watched it. I have a bit of a problem with watching things like that. No, I'll have to look at that one. I'll have to get over my own demons.
The morning show is good. The morning show is just a strange show. I mean, I do really enjoy it because it was based on Brian Stelter's book, which looked at NBC and the Today Show. The first series was all this kind of heartfelt, nuanced kind of look into workplace discrimination and relationships and real wrong things that had happened there. But then by the third series, they sort of lost the plot a bit. In the third series, they literally started by going, let's go to space. and it's like, where are we going with this?
But an interesting example was The Hour. Did you watch The Hour?
Oh, yes, it's currently on Netflix.
I watched it on
Ben
Netflix.
Whishaw.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I've watched it on Netflix, but it only got 2 seasons.
Abby Morgan wrote it,
yeah,
I think.
It's really Abby Morgan. Really, really good. And I don't know why it didn't have more series. Presumably the ratings dropped. So maybe the idea of the nostalgic looking back at the past, because it had plenty of drama in it, plenty of great personalities and great actors, but they didn't renew, and I thought that was a great shame.
With all this TV, obviously we're hoping that there's more content out there and more work for skilled professionals who haven't had a particularly good time of it recently. And there's actually a lot of new studios being built. I mean, you'd sort of be forgiven for thinking we're in a real boom time. This includes the expansion of Warner Brothers in Leavesden, a new independent studio on the Isle of Wight, and Pinewood creating a production hub for smaller films. And Scott, I was looking and seeing that Marlowe Studios might be back on the table as well. There's been a huge explosion in studio space here.
I mean, there has been. I think, obviously, a lot of it comes down to tax breaks. A lot of it comes down to opportunity. I think also just the UK have always seemed to be a very nimble, helpful partner for these big studios. The amount of films that have been made here over the course of the last 10 years, from Star Wars onwards, I think has made it a reliable, well-trusted base. I find it interesting, though, about how some sort of places are finding it hard to get planning permission. I mean, this is, I think, a wider political point about which Labour have said that they are tackling in regards to planning permission, who gets to say yes and who gets to say no in regards to new buildings being made. But also there is a juxtaposition. Some places are really advancing and opening and spending hundreds of millions potentially on new studio space, whilst other places are closing.
Yes.
And like particularly TV studios, it seems to be film stepping up a lot, whilst TV perhaps retracting. I mean, of course, trying to find a suitable TV space in London is really difficult now. You kind of pretty much have to leave it entirely just because of the rental space, whilst other places are making that absolute killing.
It's strange, this. I mean, is it a bit of a hangover of kind of peak TV from a few years ago and they finally got around to building the studios, or does it bode well for the future? That
would be a terrible thought, wouldn't it? I am confused because of the amount of technology that goes into filmmaking now and the amount of stuff which is computer driven. Do they really need these studios? I thought it was going the other way. So for example, sound stages, you don't need anything like the space for sound stages that you used to use. So I'm not quite sure what they're doing with these studios.
It's interesting to see how this will pan out because, of course, expectations have changed quite a lot in the last 12 to 24 months about how much money potentially new productions really need, how many commissions they're going to give out. I mean, I sort of feel that we're heading towards the streaming wars kind of generally. I think Netflix have clearly won. Other streaming services that are smaller are still doing big releases, but now they're more likely to be working together rather than working against. I think just today, Amazon Prime Video in the US are partnered with Apple TV Plus, so Apple TV Plus will be available as one of their kind of options on their website. But that was unthinkable sort of 3 to 4 years ago. And I think now it'll be interesting to see the knock-on effects in 4 to 5 years' time. Because, of course, at the end of the day, streamers still need to spend an awful lot of money to try to keep people at the end of the month subscribe to their services, because remember, it's not like it was with cable 10 years ago where people are signed into long-term contracts. If people don't find that there's content that's new and fresh and exciting for them, they will unsubscribe easily and go elsewhere. But I think the heat that you used to get, the promise of spending millions, possibly billions of pounds worth of content, is now kind of hitting a level which is probably much more focused on profit rather than how much can we spend in the space of time.
Well, if you're listening at home and you know more about studios than we do, help us out. Drop us a note, hello@themediaclub.com. I would love to know your views on whether all this capacity is going to be used and what's changing. Right, I think just enough time for the quiz before we go. This week, it's entitled Listicle This. Scott's day job for many years was writing listicles for BuzzFeed.
PTSD.
So in honour of that, we're going to give you both a story from the week, and you need to tell me as many things on the list as you can. We'll take turns to start.
Oh, no.
First to fail loses the point.
Oh my God, this is so complicated.
It's all right, don't worry.
This is like an ITV daytime show.
This is really bad. Yes, we should make it into a show.
There's a lot of opportunities if you want to buy the rights.
We should call it humiliation.
No, we're calling it Listicle This. Right, darts game show Bullseye is returning to ITV.
Jim Bowen.
I knew that. That's not fair.
But can you name any of the prizes given away during the 1980s original, as reported in The Sun this week? Scott, you look excited. Can you name a
why
thing?
I'm single, because on the other week when I was going up to BBC Breakfast to talk about Bullseye, I just watched episodes of Bullseye because I was stuck on a delayed Avanti train. Got my delay repay, thank you very much. And I kept a list that is on my iPad that I'm not going to look at.
Don't look at it.
Of those prizes.
Name one thing off the Bullseye.
A tea cutlery set.
That's very good.
There was a...
Wait, Liz.
Cuddly toy?
Not on Bullseye.
Sorry, I'm just trying.
What was the main thing they would always reveal on Bullseye?
A great selection of very depressing 80s looking cars.
Normally it'd be a speedboat to some couple.
Fun fact, only one speedboat was ever given away in Bullseye's history, and it was given to a couple in Coventry that lived more than 100 miles away from the nearest part of water for it to be used on.
Scott, you are amazing. I was there and I don't remember. You are fantastic.
I mean, the word amazing doing a lot of heavy lifting here. I feel it's not really an attachment.
Why don't I just give up now and let you win?
Do you think Bullseye due a remake?
It doesn't do anything for me.
Fair enough. Question 2. This week, a host of famous writers and celebrities wrote an open letter criticising the Observer deal with Tortoise.
Yes.
But how many people on that list can you name? I'm going to toggle.
God.
I'm going to toggle between you. Liz, can you remember anybody from that list?
Was Paddington Bear on it?
I don't think Paddington Bear was on it.
I was, because I did read this list. Okay, I'm not going to help you here either. It's going to be a low-scoring game.
Can you name any people on the list?
No, but I did read the list, and it was interestingly. I mean, a lot of them are stars, not writers per se.
Well, there's a mixed bag. I mean, it's a very long list from Asa Butterfield, the actor, David Morrissey, Stephen McGann, Sophie McIntosh, author.
It's coming back to me now, but I couldn't say any more names.
No. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, with The Observer, it is obviously a print publication, but all of its content's digital. If you acquire the paper, as Tortoise want to do, I mean, they've got to kind of start the digital business from scratch. That's going to be pretty tough.
I think it's a challenge. I think also internally hard to know where The Observer ends and The Guardian begins, because a lot of the journalists would write for The Guardian during the week and then would write for The Observer on the weekend. But also, if you are on the Guardian website, it isn't necessarily clear that the content that you are reading is originally from The Observer. Now, I guess some fans of The Observer would be perhaps potentially pleased with a sale to Tortoise, because they feel that over the course of the Guardian's ownership, that The Observer has become a lot less standalone. It used to have its own kind of identity. You still get that through the leader columns and through some of the columnists per se, but it's much more suited within the Guardian's model. But I guess to counter that, you're sort of going, well, if you buy The Observer, what exactly are you buying?
I totally agree. I stopped taking the Observer several years ago because I didn't really see what its unique selling point was. And I did get a little bit fed up of endless commentators, endless correspondents writing columnists, and not enough, I felt, information. But that was just my feeling at the time. But I do think you used to know years ago exactly what the Observer was. It was left-wing, it was edgy, it had news stories, and it probably still has a lot of that. But I felt it lost its way.
It does have the opportunity of regaining its brand and position with a new owner. But if you work there, I'm not sure you want to be transferred out of the Scott Trust.
But I just wonder,
yes.
I mean, this is just a general question, like what does Tortoise want from this? Because Tortoise, when it started, it was a news website. Then they much more just kind of dropped the news website thing and specifically went for their podcast investigations. Like, you know, they have won awards. They've been incredibly successful of doing that. So I'm just intrigued. I don't know the answer. Why have they decided to go, okay, now let's buy a legacy product and go back right towards being a news outlet?
I still think a lot of it is having a broader story to sell to potential funders. But I think we'll get more of that later this year. I'm going to push on with the listicles if it
it's
kills
the quickest
me.
quiz in the world.
And finally, Fremantle is testing out the Japanese show Freeze, Do Not Move in the Portuguese market. It's basically musical statues. But can you name some of the ways they try to make people move? As mentioned in the press release. Liz, I don't imagine you're going to.
I'm sorry, I just can't.
Scott,
so what was the question again? I was just thinking about the complete utter nonsense of this show.
Portuguese musical statues.
Yes.
What do they do to try and get people to move?
Move the floor.
Tickle?
Tickle is
on my list,
HR9.
in the press release goes popping balloons,
Okay.
flying mannequins,
Flying mannequins.
creepy crawlies, loud noises, robot arms that pick your nose, and comedy situations, the very broad comedy situations.
Comedy
It
situation.
sounds a bit like Candid Camera from the 1960s, doesn't it?
Freeze, Do Not Move starts off in Portugal.
This is real don't scare the hair energy, which was Saturday night's BBC One's like most iconically bad show.
Well, I'm sure it will find a UK.
I'll review it.
UK host.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that makes you our winner, Scott.
What do I win?
You win.
Speedboat.
Oh, you want a speedboat? Yeah.
I'm going to reveal the speedboat from behind the screen.
Yeah.
Well done.
No, I think it's the cutlery.
Thank you both
Thank you
to
very much.
Liz and Scott. Where can people keep up with your work, Scott?
At ScottyGB, and also on Must Watch on Firefly for Monday afternoons.
And Liz?
Well, I've got my murder mystery books out there if you want to get them on Amazon, but now I'm off to Australia because I really need a break.
Lovely.
Wow.
Shame we can't all come. Thank you to you both.
I want a holiday to Australia.
You'll have to go in your speed.
And we want you to be a part of the Media Club. There's no annual fee and you don't need two people to recommend you. Just sign up with your email at themediaclub.com. And if you want to nominate someone to be a part of the club because they've done something brilliant this week, just write to hello@themediaclub.com. That's hello@themediaclub.com. Whether you know them or not, whether they're in journalism, production or on-air talent, flag a story to us that we should celebrate. hello@themediaclub.com. My name is Matt Deegan. The producer was Matt Hill. It was a Rethink audio production with video support from Podcast Discovery. I'll see you next week.